Today, my wife and I are visiting Colonial Williamsburg, an amazing living history museum in Virginia that tells the early part of America's enduring story. Come along with me and my wife as we explore a history buff's paradise. That's coming up next.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you all today? Good. I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak with all of you. In case you were looking for someone else, I should perhaps introduce myself. Colonel George Washington, currently commander of the, I should say the 1st Virginia Regiment, although previously there was only one. Now there are two, so I can actually change it from the Virginia Regiment to the 1st Virginia Regiment. Happy to speak with all of you this April of 1758. Currently engaged in the war against the French and the Indian these past 4 years. You all have no doubt been following the war with some great trepidation, seeing as it has been a long and trying experience. And so my thought today was to provide you all an opportunity to speak with me and hear of the war in its more intimate perspective, from someone who has actually been engaged in the conflict for these past 4 years, as opposed to reading about it in the gazettes and newspapers, which do its best, of course, to express the reality of circumstances, but sometimes do not have the same perspective that someone living the actual events does. Also, I am under no illusion that this war has been difficult for most people, and at times has been mishandled. There have been questions and desires for transparency and expression of what has actually gone on, and since I have been involved and am Commander-in-Chief formally of all the forces of Virginia, it's my responsibility to answer for whatever may have gone wrong, whether it was my fault or not. And I thought it would be worthwhile to provide you the chance to question your Commander-in-Chief before this current expedition we are about to engage upon, which I will get to momentarily. Before that begins, so I have an idea of who I am speaking with. Some of you I recognize, many of you I do not, so we are now new friends, I suppose. Where are you all from? Are you from Virginia mostly? Virginians, yes?
Georgia.
Show of hands who are Virginians. Well, I'm only responsible to a very few of them. Good. How about Pennsylvania, perhaps? From the north? Good. New York? As I expected, you hear them before you see them. Massachusetts, northern New England, a few waving in the background. But my thanks to Massachusetts, New England, as well as New York. Though you are very bold people, I tell you, you have been very effective in this conflict to this point. If it had not been for you and your consistent suffering in the frontiers in the northern parts of Canada, we would not be where we are today. So my hat, proverbially, is off to you. So thank you for your service, and for your people's service. Let's see, where else have I forgotten? Maryland, perhaps? You, Delaware, New Jersey, easy to overlook. No one from Maryland? Which one? Maryland or New Jersey? Maryland? Oh, well, clearly not overlooked. Good. New Jersey, Delaware. Hence the I apologize. It's not because you are worthless, it's because you are so very small in your state, your position. Anyhow, where else? South, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia?
Georgia.
Yep. You all have been involved in there we go. Involved in a very different part of this conflict and fearing an attack from the Spanish from Florida instead of the French and their Indian allies in the frontiers. Where else have I forgotten? The obvious one. The Ohio. Parts west, the frontiers. A few. You are the ones who I wish to speak to primarily, but also the rest of you by proxy. You all know this has been a terrible conflict. And perhaps by way of engaging in my current thinking on the subject and our current circumstances in this war, I should give you a bit of context about my part in it and the part that is going on in front of you. My part in this war started many years ago in '54. Since most of you are not Virginians, you may not have heard of me, which is understandable and not worth very much, to be honest with you. My military career is a fascinating one. It's short. It has been marred by struggle, strife, some success, many failures. I became a soldier at a very young age. You may be surprised, some of you young people. I was barely 21 years old when I had my first military commission given to me. One that I sought, to be perfectly candid, but was not necessarily believing that I was equal to the task. I was offered, well, there was some discussion of being made commander of this force at the time, but I asked to be given the second position, which we will explain again momentarily. But to go back even further to explain my military career and the importance of it to me and my handling of this war, and also, as some may say, particularly certain members of our government, mishandling of the circumstances, you must understand where I came from. My upbringing was one of a single woman, my mother, a lady of great quality and affection and kindness and strength of will, if you've ever met my mother. A lady of great quality and intensity and direction of purpose for her family, for her children. My father died when I was very young. I was 11 years old. Some of you, any here 11? Few? You are? All right. So imagine, put yourself in my shoes at 11 years old. Your father removed from you, born into a certain level of privilege with certain very great expectations placed upon you. Born into the upper class of Virginia, but not the highest classes of Virginia, not a name that carries weight like the Carters, the Lees, the Randolphs, the Custuses, none of those names, but a Washington, one of no great significance, but still of a certain landed perspective, a certain privilege. But your father's removed, and the father in their society is the one who brings your public face to your name. Everything goes through that perspective. Mother cares for the household and runs, especially in a lady's perspective, the great complexity of the estates, which is a job that I do not understand myself and would not be able to do if I had to. But in my father's case, he was the one who would position me on the public stage, in the sphere of life, able to move forward and find connections to hopefully elevate not just myself, but my family's position in society. With his death at a very young age, I was removed of that, what we call a patron, the one who would walk me through life in these ways. My mother chose not to remarry, which should tell you something about her strength of character and her perspective. She took upon herself the burden of not just mother, and all of the things that came along with it, raising myself and 4 younger versions of me, for she had 5 children under the age of 11, myself and my 4 siblings, which, believe you me, was a handful. A very large handful. But she also took on the position of father. A difficult challenge for her to do, but one that she was equal to. Now, she did enlist the aid of other individuals, my elder half-brother Lawrence, the Fairfax family by their own part eventually, but in those early years, the formative times of my life, I was instilled upon me several qualities that she and my brother Lawrence and the Fairfaxes by extension also, I should say, not beat into, but drilled, emplaced in my mind. Service to one's family, responsibility, and a sense of duty. Specifically to one's family first, that's my mother, always family first. To my country, Virginia, and to my king as representatives of his great empire. That was more the Fairfaxes and Lawrence, to be perfectly candid with you. But family first, and by extension, as you bring honor to your family's name by serving one's king and one's country, you bring recognition to your name. You position yourselves well for the future. I was in a bit of a difficult place. My 2 elder half-brothers, Lawrence and Augustine, Austin we call him, were given the greater part of my father's lands, which was not significant, not insignificant, mind you, but not significant. Myself and my 4 siblings, much, much less. Talking in the several dozens of acres as opposed to the hundreds or even close to 1,000 in some cases. Not a great discrepancy, excuse me. And so another way of making my way in the world was necessary, for land would not be given to me through my inheritance. And so, I began to survey in the frontier, connected to the Fairfax family. And if you do not know anything about surveying, it's measuring property for other people, effectively. Through that, I earned enough true cash, to be able to purchase my own property, a place near Winchester, a little bullskin plantation. Plantations, that's a very kind word to call it. It's mostly a few houses that have been on fire off and on because there's been a war running over the entire property for the past few years. But that was my beginning steps into society. And in this, I also experienced the backcountry for the first time. Traveled into the frontiers of Virginia, saw the difference in life between that I had born to and that of the reality of that most of Virginia still lived in. A great discrepancy. I was young and foolish and excited and exuberant and oftentimes looked down upon these people as backwards, stubborn, and told them that many times. And I'm not exactly wrong, they are backwards and stubborn. No offense meant to you, sir. But not for the reasons you think. Then I thought it was because they were not civilized. Now I understand it's for a very different reason. Because of the difficulty of life in the frontier, the constant threat of death upon you and your family for simply trying to exist, the constant turmoil and strife, not just of disease and just general decay of life, but also this war and other threats upon you and your loved ones. That breeds a certain tenacity in people that Us of the East, especially those born to a certain perspective of privilege, myself and many of my compatriots sitting in the House of Burgesses did not understand. Now many of us do. Not as many as should, but we're moving in that direction. All that to say, my military career became shortly after this time of surveying in the frontier. I was still seeking a position and connection to move my name forward. One day, perhaps, holding a British commission in the regular army, serving His Majesty the King not as a provincial soldier of Virginia or a member of the militia, no, but serving with an actual King's commission to set myself permanently for the future. Even if my military commission was ended, I would be guaranteed half pay for life, which, believe you me, is not insignificant. Therefore, not only bringing honor to myself, but as I said before, to what?
Family.
My family. Exactly so. And by proxy, my king and my country. So, the military, it became. First we thought the Navy, my mother put an end to that, and it's very good, I get horribly seasick. Then, my brother Lawrence died, an opportunity came, and I petitioned to take his place as adjutant of the Northern Net, responsible for the militia. At the time, I thought this was a great honor. Now I know what militias actually are, and my opinion has changed significantly. We will discuss that also momentarily. But all that to say, I held this position. I was granted it not the Northern Neck, but the Southern District, for someone else of greater birth and connection had claim to the Northern District. And in the middle of this process, tensions, as one would expect, continued to grow in the western part of Virginia, the Ohio Territory. No matter what the Pennsylvanians say, it is ours. The French have been encroaching once again into lands that is rightfully ours by trade and treaty with the Iroquois Confederacy. This war that we are currently embarked upon stems around this very piece of process. It revolves effectively around the Ohio Territory and who controls it. Who controls access to the rivers? Who controls access to the trade of the region? Who can control, in our case, westward expansion, in their case, prevention of the English moving further west, connecting their colonies with Canada and Louisiana by the great river that bisects it. And of course us wishing to do the exact opposite. Prevent them from being able to connect their colonies from north to south. It's very simplistic when you think on it, but at the end of the day, it is what it effectively reduces to. All of this is where I entered this particular part of Virginia's history. A young man, 21 years old, given a military commission as a major in 1753 to travel to the Ohio Territory to tell the French to leave, which I did. Nearly drowned along the way. I do not have a very good record with large bodies of water, it seems. Finally, delivered the message. The French refused to leave. I returned, but with the news that the French were preparing a great invasion force to come down the Ohio. And a race began. Who could build a fort at those forks first? We hoped to build one. The French finally succeeded. The next spring, January 1754, this all began set in motion. I was given my second and truly my first official military commission. At 21 years old, commission of lieutenant colonel, and would become the 1st Virginia Regiment, the only Virginia regiment at the time. Soldiers separate and distinct from the militia, for we were called out permanently to be served with the people of Virginia, paid, as opposed to militia who are civilians called out for a short time and then sent back to their homes in time of threats of invasion, be it Spanish, French, etc., or in the case of slave insurrection. In our case, raised for the defense of Virginia and sent to the Ohio. I was excited by this prospect, my opportunity to make a name for myself, bring honor and recognition, as we've spoken of before. We arrived, a place called Great Meadows, and very shortly realized we were going to be severely outmatched. I had 150 men in my command. The French had 800. Great discrepancy there. The hope was that we would be able to hold out long enough for reinforcements to arrive, which we were expecting from the Carolinas as well as New York. A group from South Carolina did arrive. The group from North Carolina never arrived. The group from New York finally showed up in Philadelphia with no weapons and ammunition. So very helpful. No offense to New York. You've done much better since then. No thanks to North Carolina. But this process became quite difficult and challenging. My commanding officer was not with us. He was back recruiting individuals and hoping for these reinforcements to arrive. He unfortunately fell from his horse in an accident and was killed, leaving me commander at the age of 21. So, I began to act as best I could. We managed to discover news through our discussion with our Indian allies, the Half King, Monocatuca, and others, that the French had sent individuals to capture they and their families, to bring them back to the French cause, and if not, to kill them. Threats had been made by a man named LaForce that if they and their families did not return once again to their French fathers and continue to forsake them and join with their English brothers, then they would not live to see 30 more sons, and neither would their English friends. Rather direct, wouldn't you think? My orders were to not engage in active combat, but if necessary, to drive the enemy from the region if we were threatened, and if our allies were threatened, and to me this constituted just that thing. They found a small contingent of French soldiers who were scouting our camp for the better part of 2 or 3 weeks. We knew LaForce was in the area, we thought that's where he was, so we went to attack it, to carve off a portion of this French army, hoping that we would be able to slow their advance. We knew they were reporting back to their army news of our position. Buying time. I did not know yet my commander had died. I did not know yet the New Yorkers had arrived with their weapons. I did not know any of this. And so we carved this small group out. We captured 30 soldiers. We attacked 30 soldiers. We captured around 21 of them, killed a handful. Among them was a man named Ensign Jumonville, who unfortunately was carrying diplomatic papers, just like I had done the year before. These papers were to tell the French, well, tell the English, that the French held this legion, it was theirs by right, and that we should leave peaceably. Now the interesting thing, in my opinion, is that these documents were not presented during this time. They were presented after the fact, after this bloodshed had settled, as a way of, in my opinion, putting us off, hiding their actual intentions. But I do not know the French's mind. I can only speak my perspective. I suppose history will decide what is actually true and what is not. But we successfully attacked this group, carved them off, and I experienced the thrill of combat. My brother Lawrence had told me about it when I was young. He served at Cartagena. Now granted, I learned that later. He didn't really serve very much. He stayed in the ship the entire time and was trying not to die of sickness and disease. But the idea of not just service to one's king and one's country, but also the glory that comes to yourself personally, the excitement of the zing of the musket ball, the sound of cannon, the smell of gunpowder, how it brings a certain, if you are prepared for it and you do not have cowardice in your heart, a certain experience and understanding. It livens the blood. And so I stood at this battle, exposed to the enemy's fire, gave my men the signal, we attacked and surrounded them, and were successful in our endeavors, even though it did not go exactly as planned, and very quickly broke down. But in those few moments, I wrote to my brother John when I told him that I heard the musket balls whistle. There was something very pleasing in the sound. Upon the field of battle, for the first time, able to say that I had defeated a French force, though inferior to us by numbers of 10 or so. I had defeated a French force and stood able to enter my name, hopefully, into the annals of recognition in Virginia. The aftermath of it was something entirely different. Very quickly, our Iroquois allies, who had been threatened by these people, whose families had been threatened, and who had been being chased by them for the better part of 2 months, descended upon the wounded, and I don't need to describe what happened then. We eventually retreated, keeping some of the men with us, few of them prisoners. Monsieur LaForce, even to this day, still lies in that jail, in prison, and has been, now for 4 years. A few months later, at Great Meadows, we were attacked by the superior French force. That time, the Carolinians had arrived, 300 or so on our side, 800 on theirs, thereabouts. And a very different concept of battle became very real to me. Very, very real. There's a different sound on the other end of that whistle, particularly when you're on the losing side. A sudden ceasing of life. And for those who are young, I will not go into detail, for perhaps you do not need to know until your parents decide to express it to you. But our musket balls wreak terrible havoc. It's a soft lead, so it flattens. I will not describe it anymore. A bayonet wound is horrific. A scalp taken, tomahawk wound, etc. A third of my men killed and wounded in the course of several hours through a pitched rainstorm. Those wounded, as we retreated, allowed to surrender, for no war had officially been declared. Some of them were left behind halfway to Fort Cumberland, what was to become Fort Cumberland, to allow them to recover a bit, and then we would come back with wagons. And the enemy fell upon them, destroying them and capturing their guards, sending my men, my soldiers that I had left behind to protect their compatriots at my choice, into captivity, never to be heard from again. not nearly so glorious. The weight of responsibility began to weigh upon my shoulders very differently. I still don't understand it completely. I was still young. 4 years later now, engaged in a war since that time, Commander-in-Chief made so in 1755, after the Battle of Monongahela, which again an attempt to take the Ohio, a failed attempt, where out of 1,200 soldiers engaged, we had 450 of them killed, 550 or so wounded. That time not under my command, I was a volunteer, but still. Made Commander-in-Chief at the age of 23 to defend the entire colony of Virginia, which we have tried to do for the past 3 years, never having more than 700 men to defend 300 miles of frontier. Fully supported by our own government, watching the destruction of our frontier by an enemy that is born to the woods, that knows it, that knows its tactics, that knows its moves, that can attack one place and disappear and attack a second place before you've even arrived to the first. Desertion is horrific. My men have struggled with food, with clothing, shoes, ammunition, and weapons, either because they have never been sent to us or because some misguided and thieving criminal quartermaster, which we have just recently discovered, has been selling them under the table to the people of Winchester instead, to the tunes of some several thousands of pounds. Men in our own government began to question the ability of the people of the frontier to function and serve, or even the desire of functioning and service, saying that the officers of the frontier, this is in 56, had invented news of raids so they could simply line their own pockets with the money that was flowing to the frontier, which would be hilarious, for there would have actually been money to begin with, which there was not. And the reality of war began to press further upon them, not nearly so glorious. At Monongahela, I learned something very important. Discipline is what holds an army together. Without discipline, you lose all effect. Without discipline, especially fighting an enemy of such talent and ability and training and experience, if you lose discipline, you lose the army. If you cut off the head of the snake and there's not another head to replace it, then the army will collapse, as it did at Monongahela. If you lose discipline, like we did at Monongahela, British soldiers will then kill their provincial allies who they've been looking down upon for months because they broke into the trees to fight as they knew they needed to. And when told to stop firing, for they were killing their own men, the response was, we were told to fire, and fire we will. Several of the officers that I served with at Fort Necessity, with distinction, Peroni, Polson, Wagoner, killed at Monongahela, attempting to take the Ohio. Wagoner shot in the back of the head as he ran to save his men, having been the one who told the British to stop firing, having been told no. As he ran away from them, down he went. Not nearly so glorious, but so necessary. So from 1755 until now, I have engaged in attempting to defend the frontier. And I recognize this, though I have talked about the poor handling of the regiments by the government, the lack of supply, the lack of resources, the active undermining of men in the field, the encouragement of those to publicly describe the frustrations with the men of the regiment in the newspapers rather than coming to us face to face, to invent rumors that are not true about men in the frontier, the lack of understanding, the willingness to write off those who suffer in the frontier, not just the soldiers, but the civilians who have suffered, to the tunes of several thousands, as if their cause means nothing, for it has not touched eastern Virginia, not realizing that if we fall in the west, the east is next. That discrepancy, not understood. But the thing I have realized through this entire process, I am Commander-in-Chief of Virginia's forces. I can complain as much as I wish about the lack of support, but at the end of the day, every single soldier that is lost, every single officer killed, my responsibility. Expected, really. When it becomes a soldier, you know that very, very easily it's very likely you will die. You have to accept the reality that you, at any moment, could have your life taken from you. You come to understand that. Those who do come to understand it do much better. Those who do not suffer. Many of them die on either side. Some simply leave the regiment to desert. The part that I did not expect, out of all of this, is the suffering of the people. I've lost friends, I've lost soldiers under my command, I've been responsible for death, I've made mistakes, I have made successes. The part that continues to weigh upon me is the loss of those innocents. To watch a 5-year-old boy have his father killed in front of him 70 yards from you and then taken, speared into the woods, God knows where. And to know that by the time you get there, they'll be gone, and if you chase them, more than likely that child will be killed to prevent his captors from finding him. To watch my own Indian allies, the Cherokee, be butchered by Virginia backcountry citizens, fearing that they are Shawnee, come to attack them. Instead, they have come to help them. To have women come to me asking for assistance finding their father, their husband, their son, their daughter, weeping openly, begging for assistance and support, knowing full well that all I can tell them is we will try better next time. So I have despaired of my command. And I say this to you all as friends. Please do not speak this out publicly if you don't mind. I'd rather have it not appear in the Gazette. When I considered resigning my commission last year, I was driven to illness of health. I nearly died. You know bloody flux, dysentery, disease that strikes this region and nothing stays in. That's enough of a description, I think. 9 months of that, August of last year until about a month ago. Couldn't stand up, collapsed, was told to go home if I did not do so. If I stayed in the regiment, by the end of the year I would be dead. In that process, I came down again with intermittent fevers. I also began to find myself having my brother's disease that killed him, consumption, disease of the lungs. Also these strange pains in my stomach that would come on during stressful circumstances, causing me to double over in pain, unable to stand or think or move or act. Came to the point where I realized that I needed to leave my command behind, to have it be filled by someone more capable of the task, who had hopefully better connections to government, better understanding of the frontier, a better likelihood of surviving disease. For instead of being killed on the battlefield, as I expected, or wounded gloriously in the service of the king, I was brought low by the failure of my own body. And I had failed Virginia and the people of the frontier, those same backwards and stubborn people that I had derided so many years before, who I had watched suffer so endlessly. And I knew that I could not be the person to save them. If I had been, I would have done so. However, my mother's teaching continues to rattle in my stubborn brain. Responsibility, duty to one's family, one's country, one's king. So, I realized I set out to, at its simplest, make safe Virginia, bring peace to the people of the frontier, to take the Ohio Territory, at least the forks of the Ohio, where the French built Fort Duquesne, and stop the raids into our backcountry. Had tried for 4 years and failed every time. And then though I had been driven to the lowest ebbs of despair, if I did not attempt to make safe Virginia, I could not live with myself. Better to die in the attempt and fail than to live knowing you never tried. That brings us to today, April 1758. Another expedition to the Ohio is being prepared with General Forbes that will leave very shortly. They will march to the Ohio Territory, and hopefully, this time with 6,000 soldiers, we will be successful. We will put an end to the destruction in Virginia's backcountry. We will bring peace to Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, and Virginia, and an end to this horrific war, at least here. For now the war spans the globe. What began as a small skirmish that I was involved in the backcountry of Virginia has turned into a global conflict that has inflamed the world. But I cannot be responsible for that part. I can only bring safety to Virginia, if possible. And so I wish to tell you all that in spite of the struggles, my own mistakes and failures, my successes, our struggles in Virginia's government to bring safety to you, the people of Virginia and elsewhere, we will do our best on this expedition to end this once and for all. Or we will die in the attempt. I have spoken a great deal. I said conversation, a chance to ask me of the circumstances and the war itself, and I have shared with you things that I'm sure you do not care at all about in the process. I apologize. How may I be of service to you? I am willing to discuss the things we have already talked of. I am willing to discuss private matters. Although we are friends, I will be evasive. One never knows what will appear in the papers. And I also promise you this, in this expedition to the frontier, those of you who lost lives and family members at Monongahela and necessity, we will put their bodies to rest, if we are able to. You have my word upon that. So, friends, please distract me from my reverie, and if you have questions about what we've discussed, though it has been a difficult topic and a sudden change from my expression to yours, I would be happy for the conversation and willing to answer whatever challenges you may throw at me. Perhaps a lighter subject, yes. I unfortunately cannot, ma'am. The lady asked after Valley Forge. I have no idea where that is. In this year of 1758, I have never traveled to a place such as that name. Why? Should I keep an eye out for it, ma'am? I will log that away. Thank you. Valley Forge. Where is that? Oh, of course it's Pennsylvania. Other thoughts? Perhaps a place that I know about. Yes? How can I project how the war with the French will end, sir? Well, if we are successful in taking Fort Duquesne this year, it will effectively bring most of the conflict in Virginia and Pennsylvania to an end. That's the central hub of all the raids that come and the supply lines. If that is taken and the British control the Ohio, then all attention will turn towards Canada. The French have recently been losing their ground upon the high seas. They have held it before this point. Several defeats have sullied their numbers a bit, so they will not be able to transport troops and supplies. And to be honest with you, the King of Prussia, Frederick, has been absolutely destroying the French and their allies in Europe for the past year or so, just completely dismantling it, one thing after another. So if we are successful in barring some unforeseen change, sir, I suspect within a few years, but it will be years, sir, and the war will come to an end in our favor. I cannot say whether Canada will fall or not. Quebec and Montreal are very well defended. And we've attempted to march that way before. We can't even take a backcountry fort in the Ohio Territory. How do we know we can take Quebec without the entire might of the British Army disposed towards it? But we will try. I'm not entirely sure if we will succeed or not. Watch the paper, sir. We'll know within a few years, I think. But my projection is that if all goes well in this campaign, we will eventually be successful. At what cost? It's another conversation, sir. It's on hand here. Yes?
Colonel Washington, there are rumors that you are courting a lady of Williamsburg. Do you have any news for us on that?
There are rumors that I am courting a lady of Williamsburg. Do I have any news for you on that? Do I have any? No. Which may be news in of itself, I think. Well, evasively. The answer is I wish you'd asked me about fighting in the frontier. It's much easier to talk about. Yes, there's a lady that I have been in recent conversation with. We were reacquainted in March during my illness. I thought I was dying. And we arrived at the same place due to invitations of our friends. Unbeknownst to us, I thought I was going to stay for 15 minutes, left my poor man Bishop outside with the horses, and 3 hours later I remembered he was still outside. She and I have been in conversation off and on the past few weeks via correspondence, and on the way out of Williamsburg I have intentions to visit briefly before I head back to Winchester. So we shall see how things... I'm not very lucky with love, madam. I have proposed before twice, been turned down twice, both by the same woman. So there's no guarantee that I will have success in this. But things... Do you know the lady? Is that why you're asking? Oh, that's good. Other questions, perhaps? Yes.
Do you know Thomas Jefferson?
Do I know Thomas Jefferson? Is it Peter Jefferson's boy? Could be. No, sir. If it's the man I speak of, he's 10, I think, now. So I know of him. I know Peter Jefferson. I know. Then after a fellow by the name of Thomas Jefferson, which I cannot say I've met him. I know his father. Good man. The young Jefferson boy, I do not know. No. Yes, sir.
After you have defeated the French, hopefully, and the war is over, what are your personal ambitions?
I thank you for asking, sir. The gentleman asked for my personal ambitions if this war ends in our favor. The simple answer, sir? And this stays here. If we take Fort Duquesne, sir, I have every intention of resigning my commission, quitting a military life, and having nothing again to do with the sword whatsoever. I intend to resign at the end of this year if I survive. If all goes well with the lady in question and she will still have me, I intend to marry her. I intend to see how that works out. And I intend to become a civilian, to be a farmer and seek peace, sir. And I pray God never again to be drawn out of my intentions. Thank you. I saw several more questions, but unfortunately I must vacate the space for another. However, before I go, if you wish to have further conversation, I will take myself across the street here, and as long as we can maintain several distances, we can continue our conversation there. If you have questions or further thoughts you would wish to discuss, I am at your disposal. Until we meet again, though, friends, continue to remember the fighting men in the field as we continue to assist in this conflict against the French and the Indian, and pray for our success. I will be and will ever remain your humble and obedient servant, Colonel George Washington.
Well, that's a wrap for this Colonial Williamsburg video. I hope you really enjoyed it, getting to see another part of this amazing living history museum. If you like this sort of stuff, check out my other videos. Check out colonialwilliamsburg.org to plan your own visit here, because it's so much cooler in real life than it is on film. Till next time, this is History Buff, TN Photobug signing out, and I'm having a blast with the past.